estaría en México y le invitamos a quedarse un par de días más para tener este encuentro, por un lado, con los medios de comunicación y por otro lado, con la comunidad académica, que va a ser el encuentro de la tarde, porque también ustedes están invitados. Va a ser a una conferencia magistral. Están los datos en el mismo, aquí en el pendón. Quisiera dar una prolífica producción editorial, y esto le ha llevado a tener una voz muy reconocida, no solamente en los Estados Unidos, sino también a escala internacional. Marion se ha formado académicamente en los temas de su involucramiento en organismos gubernamentales en Estados Unidos. Ha sido asesora de políticas de nutrición para el Departamento de Salud y Servicios Humanos de los Estados Unidos. Fue miembro del Consejo Asesor en Alimentos de la Administración de Alimentos y Medicamentos. Formó parte del Consejo Asesor para la elaboración de las guías dietarias del Departamento de Agricultura y del Departamento de Salud de los Estados Unidos. Es decir, conoce cómo se elaboran estas políticas públicas desde dentro, conoce muy bien cuáles son las presiones que se enfrentan los expertos y los organismos gubernamentales, ¿no?, para elaborar estas regulaciones o estas recomendaciones. En la parte editorial es autora de 8 libros, varios de ellos ampliamente reconocidos y premiados. Ustedes tienen ahí una hoja que habla de esto. Su libro Food Politics, How the Industry Influences Nutrition and Health, publicado en 2002, es un referente internacional y una de las principales obras enfocadas en exponer cómo las grandes empresas, cómo los intereses económicos han interferido en las políticas públicas de alimentación y nutrición. En base a este trabajo que ella ha realizado es que le invitamos a dar esta plática. Es una de las voces más reconocidas, algunos dicen que es la segunda voz más reconocida en Estados Unidos sobre estos temas después de Michelle Obama. Yo le decía a Marion hace un rato que, bueno, que es temporal la presencia de Michelle Obama y que ella es más permanente, ¿no? Pero bueno, no importa los lugares, lo importante es que Marion se ha ganado una presencia en base a estos análisis que ha hecho en estos libros, en base a su presencia en las redes sociales. Tiene un blog muy importante que se llama así, foodpolitics.com. Su Twitter es de los más importantes en esta materia en los Estados Unidos. Y nos interesa mucho porque los temas que ha trabajado, entre los temas más importantes que ha trabajado Marion, ¿no?, está esta influencia de los intereses comerciales en la elaboración de las políticas de alimentación y nutrición. Y esto tiene una importancia fundamental para nuestro país, que sufre uno de los peores escenarios de malnutrición en el mundo. Una epidemia, por un lado, de sobrepeso y obesidad que ha alcanzado al 70% de los adultos. Nos hemos convertido ya en los mayores consumidores en el mundo de refrescos, de pastelillos, de sopas instantáneas y de botanas, al mismo tiempo que se mantienen altos índices de desnutrición, especialmente entre la población rural y muy marcado entre la población indígena de este país. Hemos señalado que las políticas para combatir la obesidad en México, que se han presentado a través de la Estrategia Nacional para la Prevención y el Control del Sobrepeso y la Obesidad, han sido parte de ellas, especialmente las que se refieren a etiquetado, las que se refieren a publicidad dirigida a niños, cooptadas por la gran industria de alimentos y bebidas, y nos referimos a estas que han sido elaboradas por COFEPRIS, porque hay evidencia pública, documental, de que en la elaboración de los criterios, en la selección del etiquetado, nunca participaron los expertos de este país. Sí, están las respuestas que nos ha dado COFEPRIS cuando hemos solicitado esta información, y pues es obvio que quienes participaron no fueron los 3 funcionarios de COFEPRIS que nos dice COFEPRIS que elaboraron estos criterios, que no son nutriólogos ni nada, sino fue la propia industria, porque la industria ha promovido este tipo de etiquetado y este tipo de regulación. En ese contexto pensamos que es muy importante conocer la experiencia en los Estados Unidos y el análisis que Marion Nestle ha realizado de este proceso, para poder encontrar un buen camino, para poder salir de este atolladero y poder enfrentar esta epidemia que vivimos en el país, una epidemia que ha rebasado las capacidades del sistema de salud pública. Entonces,
advertising, these are the books that I've written over the last few years. Most of my work deals with the politics of food and why it is that people make the kinds of choices about foods that they do. I believe, on the basis of my research, that people don't choose foods just because they like them or because they're taking personal responsibility for their choices. They make food choices in an environment in which the food industry, the government, culture, and society have a very, very enormous influence on people's choices, and that's really what my work is about. My current book project is a book called Soda, From Food Advocacy to Public Health, that will come out in about a year if all goes well. And this is a story about the about the soda industry, how it markets, and how advocates have, in many cases, successfully advocated to encourage people to drink less soda. And of course, this is very relevant in Mexico. Okay, let me have the next one. So this book, Hungry Planet, which was done by a photographer in California some years ago, takes photographs of what people eat in an entire week. And this is his picture of a Mexican family and their food for an entire week. And what I found extraordinary about this picture in particular was that here, among some of the beautiful produce from Mexican agriculture, is also some of the products of international food marketing, among them sodas, and you can see the range of Coca-Cola spread in the back. The next one. And this is exactly the explanation for the nutrition transition in Mexico from a country in which people were very poor and often didn't have enough food to eat to a country in which people have more than enough food to eat, but much of that food is not particularly good for their health. And Mexico, of course, everybody knows, has the highest levels of obesity among the more or less developed countries in the world. Next one. And I think it's not an accident that Coca-Cola has announced that it will be putting $8.2 billion, I don't know whether that's pesos or dollars, I think it's dollars, into Mexico by 2020. There is no question that soda companies have been increasing their marketing in Mexico, particularly since the government passed the soda tax. And this commitment, which the president accepted gleefully, holding a can that says Enrique on it, is something that's where what's going on with the government is clearly very complicated. Next one. When I was here last time, I picked up this poster, and I was astounded by it. Actually, there were a whole bunch of them lying on the ground, and I just picked one up. And it surprised me because in the United States, we don't have 3-liter bottles of soda. The largest ones are 2-liter, and I was surprised first by the size and second by the very low price. I went around and did some pricing, and often the large bottles of soda cost less than bottled water. Next one. And someone I don't know, I just met yesterday in Mexico City, sent me this photograph last week of the introduction of the new Coca-Cola Life product, which is a lower sugar, stevia sweetened product that just comes under the amount of sweetener that would be taxed. So this product would not be taxed. But what astounded me about it was that it's displayed in the fruit and vegetable section of this particular supermarket, which he told me was a Selecto. I haven't seen the supermarket yet. I'm hoping to go to one on my tour here and see this product in action. But this is not a health food, and it should not be advertised, I don't think, in a place where fruits and vegetables are being marketed. It should be in the soda section. So I was kind of surprised by this. Next one. So one of the things that we in the United States are fascinated by is the strong position that several Latin American governments are taking on soda and other food industry marketing. And it looks to me as if Latin America is taking the lead, Mexico certainly among the Latin American countries, in trying to reverse the kind of marketing that is making so many people overweight and sick as a result. So we are now looking to Latin America for inspiration for the kind of advocacy that we're doing in the States. Next one. There are a couple of issues that have come up in the conversation about what's going on here in Mexico that I just wanted to comment on. One is these nutrition highlights on American food products that were put there by the food industry specifically to prevent the Food and Drug Administration from introducing a traffic light system of food labeling on the front of packages. And in my talk tonight, I'll go through what that's about. But I understand that something quite similar is happening here. And this is something that I think is a very good issue. The problem with traffic light foods, these are red, yellow, and green signals on little dots on the front of packages. The problem with those, from the standpoint of the food industry, is that they work. People don't buy products that have the red dots on them. So the food industry has said in the United States, has said that it will do anything rather than have those red dots on its food products, and it will not ever voluntarily use that system. Consequently, nutrition and business professionals, a couple of years ago, the Association of American University Professors had a special issue of its magazine on conflicts of interest in academia, where academics who work in certain fields receive sponsorship from food companies. The next one, I can't remember what I put here. Well, yes. So the most obvious example in the United States is the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, formerly known as the American Dietetics Association, which has a long history of food industry sponsorship, and that sponsorship is very clearly connected to the Academy's very weak position in food industry marketing and other kinds of issues related to food choice. The Academy's position is there is no such thing as a good or a bad food. All foods are part of a healthful diet, and they will not take positions suggesting eating less of any kind of food, including sodas. Next one. And my own organization, the Association of Nutritional Sciences, which is the main organization of nutrition researchers and physicians in the United States. At its annual meeting, it is now accepting sponsorship from Coca-Cola and PepsiCo. And this was a PepsiCo-sponsored session on beverages and health beyond water. And at that session, they talked about how sodas are part of healthy diet. And there's really no research evidence that shows that sodas have any negative effects on health. So even in an organization in which people are doing research and are conducting serious research, there's still examples of this kind of association, and I'm becoming increasingly concerned about it, in part because soda companies are sponsoring so much research on the health effects of sodas, and that research invariably comes out showing that there's no effect of sodas on health. I think it's a huge problem, and one that needs to be addressed in the States and everywhere else. And so these are the kinds of things I talk about in my books. This is my most recent book. It's a cartoon book done in collaboration with an organization that represents cartoonists. It's got about 250 cartoons in it. I call it Food Politics Light because it is a very easy introduction, easy to read, very short text introduction to all of the issues I discuss. And maybe somebody will do a translation of it into Spanish someday. That would be wonderful. So I'll stop here and answer questions. I'm happy to answer questions about anything you want to ask. And the wonderful translator will translate them if they're in Spanish, I'm sure. Thank you. Oh, I think it's both. I think it's both. You know, again, I can mostly speak from the standpoint of the United States, where we have a political system in which the only way that our legislators can run for office is by collecting vast amounts of money. And that money comes largely from corporations. And we have a Supreme Court that has said that corporations may spend as much money as they like to try to elect candidates who represent their interests. And there's no limit on the amount of money now that corporations can contribute to candidates for elections. So that the amount of money that these corporations spend on lobbying, if it's contributing to certain kinds of organizations. So we're enormously, those of us who are in the public health community are enormously concerned about this. Because, you know, I teach students at universities and they're so depressed about the government and how tightly the government is linked to corporations, which is a very depressing situation for young people in our country. And I tell them to work on politics in the local area because in local communities you can still have a very big effect. People who work in individual schools can have a very big effect on what the children in those schools are fed. I think that's true in Mexico as well.
Here.
The department has come out with that there's a 10% reduction in soda sales in urban areas, not so much in rural areas, but in urban areas in Mexico. So the companies are doing what they can to compensate for that. And the Coca-Cola Light is part of that campaign. It gets under the tax, and the enormous investment in Mexico, the commitment to invest in Mexico. You know, I mean, sodas are deeply ingrained in Mexican culture, particularly in rural areas. That was the result of a deliberate soda industry campaign in the 1970s and early 80s to make sodas part of normal Mexican life, just as the campaigns in the United States have attempted to ingrain sodas as that's what you drink. That's what kids are supposed to drink. And the new campaign that has been wildly successful, the one with the names on the packages, on the cans and bottles that the president was holding, that campaign has been responsible for the first increase in soda sales in the United States in 12 years. Otherwise, they've been going down and down and down. There's been a 2% increase in sales because everybody wants their name on a can. The other part about the names on the cans that's interesting and that actually I hadn't thought of was I was at a meeting yesterday where they had Coca-Cola cans with Papa on them and Mama. And those are, or Papa and Mama, and those cans are very attractive to small children. And so it's a way of marketing to small children to get around the pledge not to market to children under the age of 12. So this is brilliant marketing. It's just brilliant. And yes, they're willing to spend a fortune. So that means that the advocacy organizations and the public health organizations will have to find other strategies for counteracting this kind of money that no advocacy organization can possibly reach that kind of level.
De afectar, justo como decía, los avances que hemos tenido en la reducción, aunque sea mínima, de la toma de refrescos en la población mexicana. Es decir, podríamos ver que estas reducciones que se han visto vuelvan a ascender derivado de estas estrategias mercadotecnia. Gracias.
I think they will among certain population groups. In the United States, soda drinking is a class issue. It's an issue of social class. Wealthier, better educated people in the United States are no longer drinking full sugar drinks. The word is out that they're bad for your health, and there's plenty of evidence that they're bad for your health. And so they are either drinking them in very small quantities. Sales of the very small cans are increasing, while sales of the larger, and the small ones are more expensive. This is also very clever. So the small cans are more expensive than the large containers. And the sales are down among wealthy, educated people. Sales are the same or going up among the people who don't have money, and in particular among African American and Hispanic American populations, where the levels of obesity and the prevalence of type 2 diabetes is the highest. And so the marketing is targeted on the people who are most vulnerable and the communities that are most vulnerable. And so that's what we're seeing. And I think from the talks that I heard yesterday at a meeting that I was at the convention center, the situation is quite similar here. That the poorest people in rural areas is where the marketing is being targeted the most from the soda companies. So that means that the advocacy efforts, which have been quite successful in the United States among the better educated people, now need to find ways to reach the lower income communities. And in particular, that's in the States, it's difficult because of the long history of the relationship of soda companies in particular to minority communities in the United States. For example, in the 1950s, the African American communities began to petition soda companies and to do strikes against soda companies and boycotts, to ask soda companies to market to African American publications and in African American communities because they weren't receiving the benefits of the money that was going into those publications and those kind of communities. So the wealthier African American groups who would benefit from soda industry marketing were demanding it. And they got it. And now they're in a situation where the levels of obesity and type 2 diabetes are higher, but they have a 50-year history of very close relationships with soda companies. For example, Martin Luther King, on the night before he died, gave a speech in which he asked people to boycott, asked his followers to boycott Coca-Cola because Coca-Cola was not hiring African Americans at that time. So the complexity of this is so great, and there's no really simplistic way to approach the Hispanic and African American communities, particularly those of low income, without understanding the history and without trying to change people's thinking of what used to be perceived as good for them as now being bad for them. This is a very difficult educational challenge, I think. They don't like. So the government requires the support of the business community in order to survive as a government, I assume, if this government works the way most governments work. And I'm sure that the business community has said, just as they did in the United States, this is something that's unacceptable to us. Completely unacceptable. Do something else.
Bueno, quisiera añadir nada más. En el caso del semáforo, en este momento en Ecuador ya está obligatorio. La Coca-Cola trae un círculo con una franja roja, ¿no?, que dice alto en azúcar, ¿sí? Y eso es por una voluntad de gobierno de lograr que el semáforo, en este momento en Chile, el Ministerio de Salud puso en consulta pública un sello que va a ser negro y en letras blancas dirá, en el caso de Coca-Cola, sería exceso de azúcar ¿no? Y en otros casos dirá exceso de azúcar y sal, o, de acuerdo, es decir, es un poco lo que Marion decía, en la región se están dando los avances, pero en Chile está en discusión con una presión muy fuerte, el caso de Ecuador, y las empresas están amenazando con llevar estos casos y estos etiquetados a la Organización Mundial de Comercio, argumentando que son barreras al comercio y a la libertad de comercio. Entonces el asunto es fuerte. En el caso de México, pues bueno, ganaron las empresas en su contubernio con Cofepris, total y claro, ¿no? Entonces, ese es como el presente y el problema que estamos enfrentando las empresas.
Thank you for that comment. Someone actually sent me the Ecuador labels last week, and I should have remembered that. I was amazed to see them. But it sounds to me like Coca-Cola needs to spend more money in Ecuador. As I said, the Latin American, I showed the slide of the Latin American countries taking the lead on this. There's no money in being healthy. And that's really, from a public health standpoint, that's the part that's so difficult to think about. Companies make money by selling products. They don't make money by people choosing fruits and vegetables and other things that aren't very profitable, or by being physically active and not overeating. And that's the dilemma that public health people aren't confronted with, is trying to figure out how you change behavior in a situation in which billions of dollars are spent marketing a product that is sugar and water and nothing else. A product that has no nutritional value whatsoever, that people like because they like the taste of it, and because billions and billions of dollars go into marketing it in any country, particularly countries that try to oppose it. So from a public health standpoint, this is a major challenge. It's why I spent 2 years working on this book that I was working on. And it's why these advocacy organizations that are working on this issue are doing such important work.
Gracias,
Healthcare costs, but also in the drugs that people must take or in the surgeries that they must endure. And so the hope is that once the system gets started and people get used to it, it's only in its first year, once people get used to it and it gets started, that there will be enormous pressure to do preventive health care, and that preventive health care will deal with some of the issues about diet. And the hope comes from the one shining example of a healthcare system that works in the United States, and that is the Kaiser Permanente Health Maintenance Organization. Kaiser Permanente is a healthcare organization that has existed since the Second World War, when the shipyards during the Second World War set up a healthcare system for workers that enrolled the workers, and you do prepaid health care at not very high cost, and then they take care of everything. And the idea is that if you have a very large population spending a certain amount of money on health care, most people won't use the system, and the people who do use the system will have enough money to pay for their health care. And Kaiser in the last, which still exists and is a very, very good system, now is putting increasing focus on prevention, and in particular diet. They now have organic gardens at every one of their hospitals, for example, because they figured out that if they could reduce the costs of the very, very, only a small percentage of their patient population actually uses expensive health care, and if they could reduce that a little bit, they would have lots more money to spend on everybody else. And we hope the government will figure that out too, then that it won't take 60 years to do so.
Nada más para añadir algunos datos nacionales. La propia Secretaria General de la Organización Mundial de la Salud habla justamente de la necesidad de hacer un cambio radical en la política de salud, de pasar de la atención a la prevención. Se tiene que hacer atención y se tiene que invertir más en atención, pero habla de este cambio de paradigma, de pasar a la prevención. En el presupuesto para el 2015, que en este momento se está discutiendo, ¿sí?, se están dando 330 millones de pesos aproximadamente para prevención de la obesidad. 330 millones, ¿sí?, cuando el impuesto al refresco va a recabar 14.000 millones de pesos, ¿sí? Es decir, no hay una lógica, ¿no? Y lo que dice Marion, el Estado mexicano está totalmente rebasado. Lo hemos dicho muchas veces, no se cubre con el Seguro Popular la diálisis. Más de 150.000 personas se estima requieren diálisis. Una familia de clase pobre no lo puede pagar, tampoco una familia de clase media, o va a la ruina financiera. El sistema, por ejemplo, el año pasado tuvimos 75.000 amputaciones por diabetes. El tratamiento del pie diabético para evitar la amputación es un tratamiento de mucho tiempo y muy caro. ¿Saben cuál es la decisión que se está tomando? Amputar. Sí, y esa es la realidad. Ese es el drama que estamos viviendo, esa es la emergencia que estamos viviendo, y sin duda mi declaración es que estas empresas tienen una profunda responsabilidad en esta tragedia humana que estamos llevando, porque son los principales actores en bloquear las regulaciones que tienen que implementarse y estas modificaciones de ese ambiente en el cual se hacen las malas o las buenas decisiones.
Hola, buenos días. Yo tengo un par de preguntas. Quisiera saber qué nos espera a nivel región, es decir, en Estados Unidos y México, en donde nuestros gobernantes o políticos se dejan comprar por las empresas con tal de ganar una plaza pública, ¿no? Y en la otra es qué propuestas tendrían sobre los impuestos que van más allá de gravar solo el contenido de azúcar, sino que grabara también el aporte nutricio para que pudieran caer en este rubro. Muchas gracias.
There were two questions there, and the first one was, I'm sorry, can you repeat it? We don't have a population that can afford to eat. So, these are complicated political questions, but I'm not in generally favor, I don't generally favor food taxes.
En el caso del impuesto al refresco, la primera evaluación que se hizo de los 3 meses, que está publicada en la página del Instituto Nacional de Salud Pública, hay que ver posteriormente qué pasa con todas las estrategias comerciales. Los resultados son muy interesantes porque no solamente bajó el consumo de bebidas azucaradas, sino que se tuvo un efecto que era un efecto deseado, aumentó el consumo de refrescos, de agua, ¿no?, y aumentó el consumo de leche. Esto es algo deseable, ¿sí?, esta transición de hidratación. Nosotros desde el principio hemos dicho que el Estado, aparte de invertir en prevención, tendríamos que tener bebederos para iniciar en todas las escuelas del país, para que los niños puedan a libre demanda hidratarse con agua y generar esa cultura desde la escuela. Sabemos que, y estamos protestando porque los recursos destinados a bebederos son el 30% de lo que se proyectó para el primer año en una inversión de 3 años. Creo que los resultados que se dieron, pero obviamente estas inversiones multimillonarias de estrategias comerciales, vamos a ver qué sucede, no sabemos más allá de esos 3 meses todavía.
Gracias. ¿Alguien más?
ustedes saben que hubo un posicionamiento del gobierno federal de que no se iban a mover los impuestos, no se iban a subir impuestos. Eso fue un acuerdo que se tomó por el Consejo Coordinador Empresarial. Si no mal recuerdo, el primer anuncio de esto se dio en Davos, ¿sí? Horas después de que Coca-Cola había anunciado la gran inversión que iba a haber en México. Entonces creo que hubo una negociación previa, es decir, sí vamos con el anuncio, porque el anuncio, ya saben, en estas reuniones, y Nestlé salió también diciendo una gran inversión. Entonces yo creo que dijeron las empresas, lo anunciamos, pero tú también anuncias que no vas a incrementar los impuestos. Entonces, sí, nosotros sabemos, todas las recomendaciones internacionales empujan a que, la evidencia, a que sea un 20%, que serían aproximadamente 2 pesos por litro, es doble para tener una reducción significativa en el consumo, lo cual llevaría mucho, si hay un programa gubernamental, todavía no se podría reforzar al consumo de leche. Ustedes saben, en comunidades muy pobres, donde se ha lanzado la Cruzada Nacional contra el Hambre, hace unos años nosotros registrábamos que los niños, el 60% de los niños de primaria desayunaban con refresco. Quisiéramos que cambiara la leche.
When food policy, first of all, I need to say that I'm no relation to the Nestle company. I have to make sure that everyone understands that. But when food politics first came out, I was invited to Davos. So I got to see it in action. And it's just these heads of states and heads of corporations meeting in little rooms just like this. It's quite amazing to watch. So I believe that all the deals are cut there. They really are. Yes, and I wanted to make one comment about what you said about amputations. There was a long investigative report in the New York Times a few years ago that evaluated the cost of amputations for type 2 diabetes and said exactly what you said, which is that it was so much cheaper for hospitals to amputate feet than it was to do long-term preventive care, that it was just a tragedy, an absolute tragedy. So if you've got diabetes, you can expect to go blind or have a foot cut off, because nobody's going to pay for the hospital visits or the doctor's visits that are necessary to prevent these kinds of things. This has to be prevented. From a public health standpoint, it must be prevented. Public health, you must understand, is very radical. And it's radical because it's democratic. It's to make people healthier. And it's radical because people are healthier if their personal behavior is healthier, and the healthier personal behavior doesn't make any money for anybody, except the people for whom it's healthy. So that's what public health is up against.
Yo puedo hacer una pregunta más, ¿qué opinas, porque soy doctora, pero ¿qué opinas sobre esta cuestión de la adicción a los azúcares de la que se valen estas industrias y de que en México se dice que los alimentos están muy relacionados a las cuestiones afectivas? Sobre todo, por ejemplo, se dice que se toma refresco cuando hay una fiesta, cuando hay que celebrar. Quisiera conocer su opinión. Gracias.
Let me be very clear, I love sugar. I love sugar. I believe that life is short and you should eat desserts first. With that said, in moderation, even the people who are most concerned, the physicians who are most concerned about sugar consumption and talk about sugar as poison, if you meet them on a train or in a meeting and get them quietly in a corner and say, come on, sugar's not poison, nothing that delicious could be poisonous, they will agree that it's quantitative. It has to do with how much sugar you consume. And what's especially troublesome about sodas is that there is a lot of sugar in soda, and you don't taste it because of the balance of flavors and the way that Coke and Pepsi are formulated. You don't taste how sweet it is. Whereas if you had it in front of you in a pile, you would be shocked at how much sugar there is in just a regular Coke or Pepsi. And the other problem is that it comes in liquid form, which means that it is absorbed into the body very rapidly, more rapidly than metabolism can handle it if it's in large quantities. So there's that. And then when people consume a lot of sugar, we get used to, we get a tolerance for it. We don't taste things as sweet unless there's more and more sugar added. It works the same way with salt. So is that addiction? I don't like to talk about food as addictive because we have to eat to live. Does that make it addictive? I don't know. I mean, maybe it's a matter of semantics. The people who work on addiction say that sugar reaches the same pleasure centers as addictive drugs, but not to the same extent. Much, much lower. But certainly I know people, and you must too, who say that they're addicted to sugar, feel that they're addicted, and that if they don't have it, they feel the same symptoms of withdrawal and so forth. I don't know. I think the literature on it is still not settled. It's still being evaluated, but it's very clear that large amounts of sugar are not good for health, and that people would be healthier eating less and getting used to a lower amount. But that doesn't mean none. I don't know, I mean, I don't know, it's a difficult, when you get into quantity in food, it's very difficult for people. I love to say variety and moderation. You want a healthy diet, eat fruits and vegetables and eat a variety of foods, and eat junk food in moderation. Well, what's moderation? My idea of moderation might be very different from yours. And that would be, then it's hard to talk about. So what the sugar researchers are saying is that 50 grams a day is sort of the upper safe limit. 50 grams of sugar a day is a 16-ounce soda, 1 16-ounce soda. Oh, I can't do that in milliliters. It's what, 500 milliliters or something like that? Yeah, something like that. So one of those is the upper limit of sugar that's advised for the day. Between 50 and 100 grams is a gray area, they're not sure. 100 grams, they believe, is the level above which you're in serious trouble. Well, that's for many people eat that much. In the United States, 20% of calories come from sugars of one form or another. And a third of that is soft drinks, is from soft drinks. So we would be advised to cut down. That's too much. It doesn't mean none. It just means less. That's hard for people. Very, very difficult. So this kind of dietary advising is much, much easier for people to just cut it out completely than it is to try to negotiate what a smaller amount is. And so that makes it difficult as well. That's why these little cans are so popular in the United States. They're more expensive, so that's discouraging for drinking a lot. If people switched from 16 or 12 or liter bottles to these little cans, they would probably be healthier.
Quiero hacer una pregunta en relación sobre el azúcar, Marion. ¿Qué piensas? O sea, a nosotros nos preocupa mucho porque en México, y estoy seguro que en Estados Unidos también, muchos de los productos que se publicitan para niños, bebidas y yogures y cereales, tienen enormes cantidades de azúcar. Y estas recomendaciones de que no hay que darle a los niños azúcar añadida hasta los 2 años, de que deben de consumir muy poca, porque lo que sí vemos es que un niño que consume y se habitúa a beber un líquido endulzado, va a ser una persona que va a estar posiblemente toda su vida hidratándose con algo endulzado. O sea, si no hablamos de adicción, sí de hábitos muy profundos, ¿no? Que se pueden quedar durante toda la vida, ¿no?
When I was working on the research for my book, What to Eat, I spent a lot of time in the yogurt section of supermarkets, and I could not believe the amount of sugar in children's yogurts. I couldn't believe it. More than half the calories came from added sugars. And kids love sugar. I mean, we are genetically programmed to like the sugar that's in breast milk. That's a survival tactic. And so, of course, kids like sweet foods. But that doesn't mean that every food that they should eat should be sweet. One of the things about, what you want is you want children to be eating adult foods from as early age as they possibly can, and to be exposed to the largest range of foods that they possibly can be exposed to, preferably unsweetened and unsalted, so that they get used to textures and flavors over a long period of time. That's why marketing directed to children is so insidious. It's why it's so bad. Because kids don't know the difference. They don't know what they're being marketed to. They think this is what they're supposed to do. And what the soda industry did in the United States was to try to market to children, to convince children that sodas were what they were supposed to be drinking on a daily basis. And this marketing was very successful. To undo this marketing requires teaching children to look for sugar on food labels, which is very easy to do. You teach kids to look for sugar on food labels, and they catch on right away. They really do. So an education aimed at children is really, really important. If the parents aren't doing it, you teach the kids how to do it. And that's why education in schools and the food that's in schools is so important. And when people say, well, I met with a parent yesterday, a woman yesterday, who was talking about trying to change the food and change the food environment in her child's school here in Mexico City. And she didn't think it was important enough to do that. And I said, oh no, it's the most important thing you can do. Because you can make real changes in the school, and you're setting up standards and habits that will last for a lifetime. So I think nothing is more important than trying to teach kids. Teach kids where food comes from, teach kids the difference, teach kids how to read food labels, teach kids about sugar, and so forth. That works really well. They become totally obnoxious.
En verdad les agradecemos la presencia y reconocer que ha sido una sesión muy rica. O sea, sus preguntas han sido excelentes en tocar los puntos centrales de esta temática. Si tuvieran la oportunidad de ir esta tarde, es a las 6 de la tarde, nos pasamos al sur de la ciudad por dos razones: los eventos, manifestaciones que va a haber, y porque allá están los institutos de nutrición, el Instituto Nacional de Salud Pública, algunas escuelas importantes de nutrición también, para que los académicos y los estudiantes pudieran escuchar a Marion. Muchas gracias.
And I'd like to thank you too for your very good questions, and it's really a pleasure for me to be here. It's very, very exciting what's happening here, and I hope you appreciate how much we in the United States appreciate what you're doing. So thank you very much.
Usted está viendo NP25TV, el canal oficial de los estudios Norman Patrón International.